Just want to quickly run through my process of extracting honey. I do it in the laundry. It's always handy if you've got hot water available. It just makes cleaning up a little bit easier. So to start with, to capture the cappings that are cut off the frames, I simply use a 15-20 litre white plastic drum, and then I've got a clean pot plant with plenty of holes in the bottom, piece of aluminium fly wire cut to shape to fit the bottom as well, which fits inside the drum. I then have a little bit of plastic or a lump of wood just to keep it off the bottom. The idea being the cappings fall into there, and then given a little bit of time the honey will drain away from the cappings into the bottom, which one, you can definitely use that honey, but it then makes melting down the wax cappings a little bit easier because you've got less honey with it. Then I've got this little device, but you can make up a bit of wood or whatever. These, I can't remember whether I got it from Stan or John, $20 or whatever. It fits the top of a drum really neatly and firmly, and you just sit your frame in there and you've got a firm foundation for uncapping. To do the actual uncapping, I use a standard uncapping knife. Some people have electric ones. I don't bother with that. I simply got a jug that I can fill with hot water. That helps keep the knife warm. And then I've got a spiky roller which helps me get into some of the hollows in the honey frames, and I've also got a simple old fork to do some scratching of cappings that I can't get to easily with these two items. Then to capture the honey that drains out of the honey spinner, I've simply got two drums. You can get away with one, but I like to have two so that I can capture the honey initially, filter it initially, and then I will refilter it to give myself a double filtered set of honey, and that tends to make it really clear. It also helps in stopping the honey crystallise to a degree. So these are just standard 10-15 litre drums from Stan or John with the honey trap tap on them, which just makes putting honey in the jars so much easier. And then on top I have a series of filters. I'll start from the bottom and work up. This is a double stainless steel filter. Again, $20 or $30 or whatever. Just makes it so much easier. That just sits on top of the drum. Then that's a very fine sieve. This is a less fine sieve, and that sits inside there. And then I've got this, which started life as a simple chip hot oil spatula or whatever you call it. Bent the handle up so that sits nicely there. This whole arrangement I then put under the outlet of the honey spinner, and the honey running through there, this captures the really big bits of wax that tend to block up these filters, and halfway through the process I can, if need be, take the wax from here and then ditch it into my cappings container and then put it back on. And that tends then to mean that this is a fairly straightforward process. It doesn't tend to clog up too much. Today I'm going to use my honey spinner to extract the honey out of the frames. The club has a couple of these that can be hired. There are other methods of getting the honey out of the frame, which we might do as another video at another time. The honey spinner makes it pretty easy. Mine here is a 3 frame, either full frame or ideal frame. But drop the frames in, hand spin it, and then you've got the outlet tap. I've got it mounted on wheels so that it's really easy for me to remove it from the laundry and garage it when it's not in use. Last but not least is the honey itself. These that I've got to harvest today are just ideals, but same process for full frame. Look at that beautiful frame of honey. That's pretty much 99% capped on both sides. Absolutely wonderful. Now, to avoid making a lot of mess, what I do is I've got a couple of very simple lightweight wooden frames that I use indoors here. It just means that if you've got frames on the bench top or something like that, it just means that the frames aren't going to fall over on you and drip honey everywhere. They'll remain upright. And then for the bulk of the frames, I've got a standard Bunnings 50 litre plastic container which will fit both ideal and full frame in there. And again, I've got a small box frame, lightweight box frame, that keeps the frames upright through the process. So once I've extracted the honey, I'll put the empty ones back in there. They then don't fall over, they don't make a sticky mess all over the bench. So definitely recommend that you get a couple of these. So basically they're all the bits and pieces that I use. So let's get started. I've got my uncapping drum, I've got a jug of really hot water. The knife sitting in that makes the knife a bit warmer, so when I'm cutting the wax off it goes through a little bit easier. Here's my first frame. Just sits up there. What I'll do is I'll uncap both sides of this frame, put it in the spinner, and I'll do two more, and when I've got the three of them there, we'll see how it all runs. So the knife just basically sliding down the front of the wax. Anything that's sitting out past the frame will neatly come off beautifully like that. And then to clear your knife, you can just wipe it on the bottom of the guide, back in the hot water, and then either the fork or the spiky roller for those areas up like here that were too low and the knife missed, run the spiky roller through it. If you don't have the spiky roller, then that process can equally well be done with just a standard fork, just to break the top of the cappings off. Done that side, turn him round. Same process the other side. If you've got big fat frames of comb, it's just so easy with the knife straight down. It's only those combs that are a bit sunken which cause you the problem. And again, lift the frame out and then straight into the spinner. Might be a little bit hard to see, but we've got 3 frames inside the spinner, all facing the same way. My spinner goes around clockwise, so I've got the header of the frame at the back edge, because the way this spinner works and the way the honey cells are slightly angled upwards, we want the centrifugal force to force the honey out without damaging too much of the comb. I can leave the lid open just for a little while. Gently spin the handle. I don't know whether it's possible to hear, but you can actually hear the honey being forced out and dripping against the sides. It's a little bit like rain. And you don't do it too aggressively because you don't want the frame to disintegrate. And basically what I do a very light spin in one direction, and then I stop the spinner, and then I remove the frames and turn them over, and I'll come back to do the other side again later. It's just because there's a fair weight of honey on the back of the comb, we don't want that to try and come through the comb and damage the comb. Making sure when you turn them over that the heads are all lined up the same way, and in my spinner on the trailing edge. You'll get a good idea when you pull the frames out whether they've been done or not by simply how heavy they feel. But if you think there's an area that hasn't quite been extracted properly, you might simply want to get your fork, give that another scraping on top, and then put it back in the spinner to give it another go. And then another light spin. And then when we're all done, the frames come out into the box so they don't slip and slide, and then we're ready for the next three. Just by way of interest, I've just weighed this full frame and it's 1.85 kilograms. So I'll uncap it, we'll weigh it again, and then we'll also weigh it when we're finished spinning to give you some idea of how much honey is actually in a frame. Okay, so here's the frame that full was 1.85 kilos. When we uncapped it, it was 1.65, so we've taken about 200 grams of wax off. And then we'll just check to see what it is now. About 390 grams. So if we call it 400 grams, our amount of honey in it is about 1.2, something like that, kilograms of honey in an ideal frame. Not too bad. We've finished the uncapping. I've done 9 ideal frames, so all my uncappings are in there. Top comes off, that just needs a little bit of clean up in warm water. I won't take this out fully at the moment, but you can see it's nicely dripping honey, and we've got all of the wax cappings in there. I'll probably leave that overnight to see if we can get some more honey out of it, and then in the drum itself, which is a bit hard to see, you can see that there's half an inch or so of honey there at the moment. There'll probably be a bit more overnight, which you can certainly run through your filters. It's perfectly good honey, and then the wax cappings will have less honey in it and a little bit easier to melt down. We'll at some stage do other videos on melting the wax down. We've spun off, in this case, 9 ideal frames of honey, so that's all in the tank. You probably want to leave the tank to drain a little bit down the side walls, but you can drain off the honey while you're still spinning, and in some cases that's necessary. If you've got too much honey in the drum, as you spin, the spinning baskets will get caught in the honey, so you will need perhaps to drain some off if you're doing a lot of frames. If you're only doing a few frames, you can leave it till the end. So basically we need our bucket, make sure the tap's secure, try to leak it all over the floor. Then in my case I've got my double, which is the fine mesh, and then slightly more coarse. Sit that on top. Then I've got my special chip filter, which goes on top again. And then it's just a matter, you might want to, if you're not spinning anymore, you can perhaps chock the back of the drum up so that it runs a bit more freely. But you can see the big bits of wax are already being caught in this top filter, so that these two finer filters aren't being clogged up by this. And I might leave this running for half an hour or so, come back and clean this top filter up and then keep it going. It's been about 20 minutes, the drum's emptied, although I could tip it up perhaps a bit more and we'll get a little bit more out, but you can see in the coarse filter big lumps of wax, sadly a couple of dead bees as well, so that will get transferred into my cappings. The coarse filter, bit of honey still there, fair amount of wax, bits and pieces, and then in the fine filter you can see specks of wax around there, and then honey still dripping off the bottom. There's the final product, pure Geelong in a bucket. I'll let that settle for 24 hours, then I might remove a little bit of scum off the top before I run it through the second lot of filtering. The drum's settled now for about 24 hours, and you'll see that there's a small amount of scum on top. Some people don't mind it, other people want to get rid of it. The easy way to get rid of it is to take a small amount of grease paper or paper towel, just gently put that on top, smooth it in. It's a little bit wasteful of some honey, but you leave that there for 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll lift it up, drip it into another container, because you can certainly use that honey, but it's lifted all the small particles of wax with it. And then the drum is ready to run through for a second filtering. To do the secondary filtering, I've simply got the original drum of honey, take the lid off so we don't get an air vacuum, the empty drum, I put the fine filter on first, and then this time I've just got the piece of muslin that I jam in between the fine filter and the coarse filter. And it's purely a matter of releasing the honey out of the top drum, making sure that you don't miss. You can regulate the flow once you see how fast it's going through, so that you make sure that the flow out of the top drum doesn't exceed the amount. And it might take a couple of hours for this to run through properly. That's now had a couple of hours running through. The top drum is empty, and very little wax in the top coarse filter, as you'd expect, seeing it's a second filtering. The gauze is covered with fine wax particles and a tiny little bit of honey, and then again, as expected, the bottom fine filter has got very little wax in it, again because it's a second filtering. And the end product